back to TalkNorth.com. Thank you for listening. If you can, please download before you listen. It helps our business. I'd also like to thank our producer, Brandon Morton, and let you know if you'd like to sponsor this program or any of the programs on the network, you can reach me at jsouhan47@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Viking Update Show, starring Tim Yoder, publisher of VikingUpdate.com. I'm Jim Souhan from the Star Tribune. We need to start with Adam Thielen, what it means, and what kind of a deal did the Vikings really get when they decided to give Adam Thielen a contract extension and when they brought Anthony Barr back. They're kind of a piece in terms of the Vikings' philosophy on their own players. Thanks to Twill and the United Galleria, BiteSquad.com. Promo code TalkNorth gets your first delivery free. And Tony Hoagland, Hoaglund, your State Farm agent in Champlin. All right, what did you make of the Adam Thielen deal, Tim?
Well, I think with Thielen, they got a bit of a discount, not necessarily in, he signed a huge deal, which I think was really equal to what the market would have bared with him. It's a 4-year, $64 million deal, averaging $16 million a year, but it doesn't start for a couple of years, and it doesn't really kick in for a couple of years. So they are getting Thielen for the next year or two on a really good price, and I think it keeps Thielen happy. He said during a press conference this week that, it was never about the money, and you hear that a lot from the athletes. In Thielen's case, I do think there was a huge desire to remain in Minnesota, where he grew up, where he played his college ball, and where he's really developed into a top 10, at least, NFL receiver. And so, at that $16 million a year, that puts him right about where he should be based on the production he's had compared to other receivers in the league. He's around that 5 or 6 mark when it comes to catches, yards, touchdowns, all of that stuff. And he's being paid at, I think it's the number 6 contract as far as money goes. With Barr, I would argue that maybe he's not worth what they are paying him. But then you look at what the Jets were offering him, and clearly they valued him even higher than the Vikings were able to pay him because of the Viking salary cap situation. And, he's taking $2 or $3 million less. I just thought it was really interesting when, Thielen talked about his contract, when Barr talked about his and how much he agonized over the decision. And then this week, a lot of the reporters were really caught off guard when Harrison Smith was asked a very simple question about getting Anthony Barr back. And Smith, he started to tear up a little bit, and he usually shows very little emotion when he's talking. And, even when asked about that as a follow-up, he said, yeah, I didn't expect to get that emotional about it. I don't know what happened, but, it does seem to be a little bit of a trend that players are willing to take a little less money to stay with the Vikings. And you hear it all the time in pro sports about the culture in the locker room, but they really do seem to have a close-knit locker room where people genuinely like each other and get along and are friends. And I think that played a big part with Adam Thielen. I think it played a big part with Anthony Barr.
I agree with you. And, we spend time in the locker room, you more than me, but you do sense that it's a pretty good locker room, that people like each other. And really what destroys pro sports teams is selfishness. And you don't get the sense there's much selfishness in there. And look at the wide receiver position. I mean, Diggs is more high-strung than Adam Thielen, but I don't think he's selfish. Thielen is not selfish. Rudolph is not selfish. That doesn't mean they don't want to catch a certain number of passes, that they don't want to be highly involved in the offense. It means they don't put themselves above the guy next to them. That's kind of the defining aspect. And I get that sense all across the roster. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into winning more games, but it does mean that maybe you have a better chance of keeping somebody who at a reasonable price.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when fans think of NFL receivers, they get that diva attitude attached to them. And with Diggs and Thielen, you have two incredibly highly competitive athletes that are, they're very good at their positions. They're very good at a lot of different things that involve, the athletic traits that are needed to play receiver. But to me, what stands out is they are so competitive, and they, you can see it when they maybe miss a ball that they should have had, or they let a contested pass hit the ground. But you don't at all get the sense about me, where, there are several other receivers that have that stigma attached to them around the league. These guys, it is to me a pretty interesting dynamic, because Diggs and Thielen seem to get along really well, and yet they both seem to cheer for the other guy, and it's a really good dynamic. And then when you go on the other side of the ball, talking about Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks talked this week about how he has, his whole college and NFL career has basically been spent with Anthony Barr at his side, and they are really close friends. They work out together during the off season, and throughout the whole contract thing, while Barr was going through it, Kendricks said, he basically felt like there was very little chance that Barr was going to come back. And, he kind of even texted Barr that when he was going through the negotiation with the Jets, and you kind of got the impression like there was I'm really, really going to miss playing with you. And all of a sudden Barr texts back, and it was basically saying, well, wait a second, maybe we're not done. And it caught Kendricks by surprise, and in a really good way. So there are a lot of close position groups on this team. They rooting for each other. They've bought into, defensively, they've bought into Mike Zimmer's team concept, where, a guy like Danielle Hunter, sure, he probably could have 18, 20 sacks a season if he's just all about getting the sacks, but he understands that sometimes you take yourself out of position if that's all you're going for, and it hurts the defense. And it is a really good locker room right now, and you haven't always been able to say that. I mean, you and I both go back to the mid to late 1990s, and there seemed to be some selfishness in that locker room. There seemed to be some tension between different position groups, between different players and coaches, and I just don't get the sense that that's the case with this team.
I'll follow up on that. Do want to thank Twill in the Edina Galleria, twillmn.com. The Edina Galleria is still just a beautiful place. I'm not the fanciest dresser, but like when I covered the Final Four, I wore my Stenstrom shirts that I bought at Twill, just to class myself up a little bit. Now I'm back to wearing, Peter Millar and Johnny O shirts when they go out, hit golf balls, whatever. Twillmn.com, Twill on Instagram. Check it out.
Jim usually doesn't like to shop for clothes. I don't like it when he shops for clothes either, because he used to buy stuff I'd want to throw out. That's why I'm so glad he's found Twill in the Edina Galleria. He likes shopping there because of the comfortable environment and the friendly staff. He finds clothes that actually fit him properly and are high-quality brands that will look great for years, whether he's golfing or working. Our favorites so far are Peter Millar, Johnny O, and Barber. We spend our money at Twill because we love the clothes and we love the no-pressure shopping. Drop by Twill in the Edina Galleria for the best shopping experience and best clothes you'll find in the Twin Cities.
Just so we're not being too Pollyanna here, we also have Xavier Rhodes, who seems mad at Zimmer and who gets in fights with Stephon Diggs on the practice field. I mean, there are no perfect locker rooms in any sport at any time. There's always tension in some way. But I think still overall it's a pretty good locker room. And the other thing is I did cover the Vikings even earlier. You started covering them mid-'90s. I covered them starting in 1990. And, man, tell you what, Keith Millard and Chris Dolman would have knifed each other to get a stack away from the other guy. I mean, that defense used to compete with each other for sacks, and I don't think that dynamic is quite the same now.
Well, I would throw this in there too. When you talk about Diggs and Rhodes and how they got into it during training camp last year, that was highly competitive, and that was there. I do believe there was genuine tension there, but what I sensed a lot of that coming from was a competition between offense and defense going against each other in training camp, getting a little tired of each other. And, Rhodes is generally considered a quieter player, and that's true off the field. But I think his competitiveness matched against Diggs. Diggs maybe said a few things that Rhodes didn't like, and they get into it. And I don't necessarily mind that, and a lot of coaches don't mind that as long as it doesn't take away from what they're trying to get done on the field. And during that particular day, it got to that point where it was, not a positive competitiveness, and it just got in the way of what they're trying to do. Zimmer sends them to the locker room, and they basically put on a good face the next couple of days in camp. But you can tell that those type of things are going to happen from time to time when it's a really competitive environment. And I think you have two high caliber players going against each other, and neither of them wants to lose. And when one of them wins it and throws it back in the face of the guy who lost on that particular play, that's when tensions boiled over. And so I think there's a healthy competitiveness, but I'm talking more about, guys on offense or even in the same position group. There's a really close bond between a lot of the defensive linemen, between the linebackers, Thielen and Diggs I talked about. So I like the dynamic in the locker room. That doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't going to be some tensions here and there, but I mean, that's going to happen anywhere when you've got, off season 90 players on the roster during the season 53. Not everybody's going to be best friends, but I think they do a great job in just creating a good competitive environment.
Everson Griffen had a horrible year on many levels. His personal problems, not as productive as usual. He takes a pay cut. He had to know what's coming, but it probably still hurts.
Yeah. This week was sort of a week that, players have been away for about 3-4 months, and they've had some time to reflect on things. They come back, and Griffen was as open and honest as we have heard him talking about his problems last year. He didn't want to go into great detail, but he did say, it was a rough year. He feels like he is back to himself, and a few of his teammates felt like he was there. But what I liked the most about what he had to say was, even though he feels like he's back, I think he realizes this is a day-to-day, week-to-week situation where he has to keep himself in check, make sure that he's doing all the right things so he doesn't have a relapse with any of the mental health issues that he suffered last year. And, I thought it was interesting that he said because of the rough year he had off the field, he came back, he didn't feel like he played very well, that he knew a pay cut was coming. And a lot of players wouldn't necessarily admit that and wouldn't necessarily agree to it. And so he did. And I think he also realizes that when it comes to his contract, it is very much a year-to-year thing. He took the pay cut to stay with the team in 2019. They didn't really do anything with his future years on his contract. So every year is going to be an evaluation and sort of a continue to prove it year for Everson Griffen.
What do you make of Dalvin Cook? Can we expect a guy who's not only going to be productive, but can be healthy for an entire season?
Yeah, and that's a tough thing. I mean, you never really know if a player is quote unquote injury prone or not. I think everybody felt that way about Robert Smith early in his career when he had the torn ACLs, and then he comes back and was very healthy for the majority of the rest of his career. So with Cook, I definitely think it's possible, and I don't think that he has the body structure where you say, oh, he's taking a lot of huge hits or he's running too upright. I think it's just kind of impossible to know, but I do think that what he brings as a running back and even as a pass catcher out of the backfield is going to bode very, very well for the the way the Vikings are setting up their running scheme, their play action scheme. If he is healthy, I